Greetings and welcome to everybody to the August 14th Dr. Obitashaka Show. I want to welcome our two guests, Miss Brianna Moore and Dr. C.O.R.E. McDougall. Welcome to both of you. How y'all doing? Brianna?
Pretty good, thank you.
Good.
Very well.
Doing okay, C.O.R.E.?
Doing well.
Okay. I want to introduce both our guests. In the case of Dr. C.O.R.E. McDougall, he's been on the show before. Some of you, many of you have probably heard the discussions we had on Black masculinity with him. First of all, Miss Moore, you're going to really enjoy her. This is a serious sister who has a lot of experience in the subject that we're dealing with today, which is nurturing traumatized women and men with physical, emotional, and mental injuries through psychological and cultural healing systems. And so Ms. Moore has a lot of experience in this, over 30 years throughout the Bay Area, where she's done work dealing with mental health, with medical practitioners and mental health people. And she's also worked with essential workers, supervisors, teachers, and various community-based organizations and city, state, and federal agencies, specifically in San Francisco and the Bay Area, Alameda, Contra Costa, Marin, Sacramento, Santa Cruz, Los Angeles, Long Beach, and San Bernardino counties. Ms. Moore has developed and presented training focused on nurturing traumatized women and men with physical, emotional, and mental injuries. Also utilizing various clinical techniques. So she provides healing and direction and guidance for people so that they're able to get and remain focused on the moment and live good, wholesome lives. And this is an area that I admit to having no expertise on. And I thought it was essential that we bring in an expert who has knowledge and practical experience. And I know from talking to you, Brianna, that you not only have a lot of background, but you got a way of conveying stuff that I think it's going to be hard for somebody not to get what you're saying. So it's more than a pleasure. And by the way, you need to unmute again.
Okay.
Yeah. It's more than a pleasure to have you on this show. You know what I mean? And you're going to be on more than once.
Oh, wow.
And, let me tell you, because this is the kind of stuff we need. Dr. C.O.R.E. McDougall, he's been on the show before. By the way, I want to just preface this by saying, because we're going to deal with intergenerational stuff in here, as well as this current stuff. He's living proof that our culture lives on in the younger generation, because this young man here is one beautiful young man. He took my place at San Francisco State. I know that that has meaning, so it implies that he's trying to reproduce me. No, he just took my place. Wade Nobles and I retired at the same time in 2005. And we had a number of people applying for the job, in-house and out. And I pledged to myself, I'd make no commitments because I'm gonna deal with the situation. Whoever comes up that's the best candidate, I'm going for that person. Because there was some temptations, there were some people that I knew, there were different people, and they all had good qualities. But when I saw this man, first of all, I read his Vita, and when I read the Vita, that's your background, I already saw some stuff. I said, okay, what did I see here? You know, older generation Blacks have learned to deal with potential. Younger generation Blacks have been taught potential don't mean too much, is what you can do right now. Given how little some people have on that side, they should really go back to potential, you know what I mean? Because potential will really tell you where stuff is going. So I was looking at his video and I says, uh-oh, this is good. I can read in this good family background. I can see it. And then once I met him, it radiated. And then what I saw was discipline. I said, oh, this guy's got discipline. And I said, I see where he's going to be productive. And then consciousness, it was all over the place. So when we interviewed him, there was no question. This is the guy that I'm picking as my replacement. The department had to vote on it. But if I said no, that person ain't being picked. You know what I mean?
Right.
C.O.R.E. McDougall, let me tell you something. This brother has proven to be one of the best hires we've ever made. Came up with a book on research methods at a very young age. It's received national awards, including from the National Council of Black Studies, and has written a book on Black masculinity. But he proved to be an outstanding teacher and a nurturer and carer of students, really cares about students. Great character. And then he had one missing link in his life, which was love, and he found that. And so the brother should be on cloud nine, especially if you got a good woman, a good Black woman in your life. You should be on cloud nine. Am I right, brother?
That's right.
Yeah, and he's also humble, so he's going to be modest and stuff. But I can say that he's proof that our culture is strong and it lives on. And the younger generation has been hit by some stuff that my generation wasn't hit by. And we can all point out other generations were hit by stuff even harder. But some of this stuff is very difficult to deal with. And yet we got a continuation of culture with this generation. So while we're focused on other things, including the discontinuities, the fact that there's been some breaks in the culture, we need to note that this culture continues strong. So before getting into this discussion, I just want to encourage viewers, one, to subscribe, hit the subscribers button. And this is extremely important for this show. Also want to encourage people to sign up for the 12-month webinar, which deals with the 6-fold stages to mental freedom. And it'll probably come up in this discussion because it's an ultimate healing system where you are in best condition you can possibly be in. In fact, instead of you worrying about stress, you will cause stress to those who need to be stressed. That's your oppressors. And you go through life peaceful while you're causing trouble. As the good Congressman John Lewis said, good trouble, because I don't make that distinction. It's just trouble. You know what I mean? Good, bad, it's for a good cause. Because I know what he meant. He got to use the right method. Hey, whatever method works for me. You know what I mean? So I encourage people to sign up for the 6-fold stages of mental freedom. Go to my email, otashaka@sbcglobal.net, and note your interest. And we'll be sending out a sign-up sheet pretty soon with questions for people who will be involved in this. Also, as a background for this show, I want to remind you that, first of all, we have been doing a series preceding this one. This is important because we in the past have been looking at what hit Black communities since '68, because some things have hit the Black community since that time that has particularly affected the younger generation, and of course the older one as well, but especially the younger one. And it's caused this generational divide that Professor James Smalls and I discussed last week. And sometimes the older generation can't understand what the younger generation's gone through because they didn't get directly hit as hard by these forces that were the forces of globalization that took jobs out of the country, forces of drugs being put in the Black community on a massive scale, the force of losing a lot of Black leadership through assassination, imprisonment, exile. They ran 3 of those on me, as well as trying to deny me work. That's called COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program. So that the younger generation got hit by a series of forces that weaken our socialization process. Families, going from two-parent households for 100 years, 75% of our families had a man and woman in it, to 29% of our families having a man and woman in it now. So what hit our community since 68 did more damage to the institution of the Black family than from 1865 to 1968. And our youth got caught in that divide. And so sometimes Smalls last week pointed out that a lot of the youth have issues with elders because they feel they failed them. And there's probably some truth in that. But there's also the fact that the reason that they don't have a father in the house in most cases isn't that the father didn't want to be in the house, but as one of the blues songs says, baby, the computer took my job. Or it went to China. And I'm not blaming the Chinese. Corporate America sent those jobs overseas. And so no finance, no romance. And so a lot of brothers left the household as families were hit heavily. And in my book, Return to the African Mother Principle, Male and Female Equality, I note between 1976 and 1982, 700,000 Black men lost their jobs. 700,000 Black men left the family. There's a direct relationship between economics and the stability of the family. And Professor Smalls was making the point that a lot of the things that we see as real problems in the Black community right now, real serious ones, the ones who are at the extreme end of causing them, in most cases, they ain't got a job. Not all cases, but in most cases, they ain't got a job. And that's a reality. So that was background for getting to this point of this discussion. And for 2 weeks, we did a thing on how the Black Power and Black freedom movements of the 60s weakened the presidency and weakened the institutions of power in this country. And as a result, the system decided to come back on us. And part of the comeback was to break up Black communities. They didn't break them all up, but I know the community that Miss Breonna Taylor Moore is going to talk about, the Hunters Point, is undergoing rapid, dismantling right now. And that was a decision made by these forces. The Fillmore is no more. That was the basis for the community struggles of the 60s, and Harlem is no more. So these were decisions made to attack Black power at its root, which was our communities, just as our families were attacked. So this discussion here is being held in the context of what's hit our communities over this period of time, and of course, what had hit us before. This is not the first time that we've undergone hits, but these hits were a lot harder to handle because of the global power of the institutions that carried out the hits. So that's background for this discussion. So what I was thinking about was, I was working out yesterday, and my best stuff comes when the endorphins kick in, you're pumping the iron and doing all your little stuff. And then I was thinking, well, what's really interesting about Miss Breonna Moore and C.O.R.E. McDougal is they come from two different generations. Miss Breonna Moore comes from my generation. I'm older than her, but we come from the same generation. And so there's a certain set of experiences that go with that. And then C.O.R.E. comes from the younger generation. Miss Breonna Moore comes from the 50s generation, and Dr. C.O.R.E. McDougal comes from the 80s, the midst of the hip hop generation. And so there's some realities that each see, and then both probably see the other reality as well, that I think need to be addressed. So what I wanted to do was to start with a discussion around the intergenerational issue, because as we deal with the issue of healing and trauma and stress and all these things, it's within a context. And so what I'd like to do is start with Ms. Moore. If you could kind of describe your family background. I know you started in the Bayview Hunters Point, the Black community that surrounded you in San Francisco, including that extended family community, the culture that you were influenced by, the values that impacted you as you were growing up, and also talk about how did you see the relationship between the younger and the older generation of Blacks, and what shifts have you seen between these two generations as time has gone on in terms of family values, culture, and so forth? And what do you see as some of the causes for these shifts?
Well, thank you, Baba Tashaka. And before I begin, I always give honor to the ancestors and thank them for their contributions. Those indigenous people from whom this land was stolen. My ancestors were enslaved and brought here in the belly of a ship. And so I just want to take a moment to just say thank you, that I'm very, very grateful. And I'm so enamored by what you know and how all that wealth and the history that you have in that brain. It just impresses me. So I thank you for sharing it with the world. So I am 69 years old. I'm so close to 70. I'm just like tapping right there, and I'm really excited about that. But my parents arrived here from Texas and Louisiana by railroad to find work in hopes of a better way of being, so that I could be here with you today as a grandmother, as an aunt, as a friend. So I was born in the Bayview, and I remember the address, 1442 Revere Street. And my parents moved from the projects to Potrero Hill. My mother did day work, where she cleaned white people's homes in North Beach. And my father was in the service industry. He was a Pullman porter, a doorman, and a taxi driver, all at the same time. And he died at 58 years old in 1964. And today I know that it's from also not eating well, but mostly from the oppression that Black men had to deal with in those days, especially being in the service industry like that. So with both my parents working, I was what they call a latchkey kid. I came home from school, I changed my clothes, and I went outside to play. And because I was always big boned, all the other mothers who were at home, we always called them nosy, in the window, watching everything, but they looked out for me. And if I misbehaved, or if I was too loud, or too, being a little bit too outlandish, which is running after a boy, nowhere near what they go through today, I would be called in the house and somebody could correct me. Those are the values that we had. Anybody could correct a child. And then you would go in the house and you would get in trouble with your mama as well. So they weren't afraid of us. And there was a woman, her name was Sister Pointer, Mary Lee Pointer. And so she was always the one that was watching and catching me. And she would make me come in the house and eat oatmeal, plain oatmeal, no butter, no sugar, no nuts, so that it could like close my mouth. I didn't eat oatmeal. I just started eating oatmeal 15 years ago. Now that is trauma. But our Black family culture was about respect for your elders. Children were seen and not heard. Talking back like kids talk back today, you could get a lot. You could get a look, and that look said more than any word. They would give you a look, or excuse me, or who you think you're talking to. And if you said nobody, you got in trouble. And if you said you got in trouble. Now, my mother wasn't a hitter. She was a crier. But I respected my mother. And so I behaved myself. Today, the millennials call that adultism, the sayings and the words that they call it adultism. And so my response is, I am the elder here, and my word is the end all to be all. You call it whatever you want to call it. I'm the oldest person in the room. So you got to do something about that and I even changed my name to Ms. Beat so that they would put a handle on the name. Because, if you're not 69 years old, you can't call me Brianna. So, and then the last thing I want to say about that was the shifts. I think the shifts were twofold. And like you talked about earlier, drugs in the community, and then the disregard for the Black family. And those statistics that you gave around the family and the man not being in the home were really significant. That was significant information. But when I grew up, heroin was the thing, and everybody was an addict. And I survived that until later in my life when I became addicted to cocaine. But that didn't happen until in my late 20s when I got off base. So I was addicted to cocaine, not crack. It's free base. So, you know, there are levels of class even in drug addiction, right? So my dad was an alcoholic and my daddy drank Johnny Walker Red and smoked Lucky Strike cigarettes. And my mom drank vodka until she found church and God. So that foundation that my parents and the community helped provide me and help pull me back from the brink of insanity. My mother was the elder in the community and everybody knew her and respected her. I remember a funny story one time when she was in a convalescent hospital and she had one of those floor model TVs. You know how to have a TV and it doesn't work, then you stack another TV on top of it. She had one of those TVs like for 20 years. And it was a lovely piece of furniture. Well, I went by one day to check on my brother and check on the house, and somebody had stole that floor model TV. And I went outside. I said, whoever got my mother's TV, you better bring it back. And they said, that was Miss Moore's TV? She said, okay, I'm gonna get it. I'll bring it back. The next day I came back, that TV was back in her house. So that kind of respect for your elders and what she meant to the community was very, very essential. And the other thing that I think is that we stopped caring for ourselves and we stopped caring for one another. And somewhere we believed the hype, somewhere along the line, we began to believe the hype that we were not enough. And then that white supremacy will separate us. And now they have us as an acronym, BIPOC, right? BIPOC, Black Indigenous people. I'm not a BIPOC, I'm a Black woman, right? So every time they say that, I correct them. But it's just a ploy. They feel that they're recognizing, as the census shows, that they are outnumbered. And a scared group of white people is a dangerous thing, life-threatening, in fact. With this news, they're afraid that we're gonna do to them what they have done to us. So I think that the causes behind the shifts are disregard for one another, disregard for the family, and drug addiction, and just not caring for one another.
That's graphic description there. I could exchange an experience. I was raised 7 years in the Fillmore, Bush Street, and then the rest in a nearly all white community in Bernal Heights. But in the community I was raised in, when I was a kid, I broke the old lady's window that was down the street from me on Bush Street. She gave me a whipping. When I got home, my mother gave me a whipping. And then another time I had a friend, and of course I ain't gonna blame him, I did this. I got in my father's car and tried to drive it and hit a telephone pole.
Oh no.
My father never laid a hand on us. It was my mother who gave us the heavy manners. But it was grandma's hands all over the place in the Black community. Their eyes were on you.
Yes.
They were looking out at you, and you better act right. And everybody knew what you did. So if you thought you were slipping and doing something and getting away with it, it wasn't going to work. So yeah, that extended family community was extremely important. And respect for elders and the love of children. Community raising children was extremely important. I wanted to raise a question with you and Dr. McDougall. You were talking about the alcoholism in your family, and I had it in mine. And a lot of people in my generation had that as a problem. What did both of you, especially starting with you, Brianna, what did you see as some of the things that drove the alcoholic behavior, you know, the need for alcohol? And I observed it more among men than women. but I don't have any data on it. I'm not going to say there were more men who were alcoholics than women. And I observed that women tended, who were not alcoholics, to be addicted to Jesus. And I'm not saying that that was the whole truth either, but I'm just wondering, what do you see as some of the things that were driving people to drink in excess?
Well, for me, I became an addict as a result of first the epigenetics. It was in both sides of my family. And then I was in a domestic violence relationship. And so drinking and drugs took me out of that. So I look at that as one of the reasons, and really oppression and depression, and not really knowing who I was and what I had in my life, and was really afraid to stand up on my own 2 feet because I was being controlled by this man in a very horrific way. And I didn't have a voice. I didn't know that I had a voice. I didn't have a voice. And so once I got into recovery and I started to understand who I was and what was going on inside of my mind, body, and spirit, and the essential importance of my heritage and the way that I was brought up. My mother didn't raise me to be a drug addict. And once I woke up to that, and I realized that there were some other things that had happened. I had adverse childhood experiences that caused me to not see myself for who I was and who I was able to become. And until I learned about that and learned about the condition and understood about adverse childhood experiences and kind of took myself off the hook and changed the way that I saw myself. I used to call myself the B word and have it wore it like a badge of honor across my head. And I mean, how demoralizing is something like that. And you hear young women say that to themselves today, a lot. I used to do that. And then I woke up and I realized that what you think about, you bring about. And if you give yourself those labels, and you'll step into those different types of categories and believe that about yourself, and think that you're not worthy, and think that you're not royalty, and think that you're not smart. I remember one time, right as I got my master's degree, I found a study that was done in San Francisco by Willie Brown, his office. And it said that people who are raised in the projects have less than a 1% chance of getting a master's degree. Now, what if I had seen that information when I was getting, like, in high school, right? That I would have believed that. And I think that's what happened to our community, that we started to believe what people said that we were not capable of doing. And fortunately, I had some role models like you and Dr. Nobles. And then I had this group of a circle of sisters that we stood on each other's shoulders in order to make it through, to become educated, and to give back to the community what was given to us by our elders, so that we could give it to these millennial young people who didn't really have it. They didn't have it because we started getting loaded. So we left the community, and then we were able to make it back as a result of different 12-step programs and different ways of healing for ourselves. So I come back, I used to call myself a wounded healer. And that was because of the wounds that I had. If you have a wound and you touch it, like if I cut myself and I touch it, it hurts. So anytime there's something that happens to a person that's traumatic, it's because of a childhood wound that got tapped into at that particular moment. You might have done some work on it. It might be healed. It might not be healed. But when you react to it in a certain way, then that means that something that happened to you, one of those adverse childhood experiences, was touched. It was touched. So one last thing, I couldn't help my brother, who was also an addict and an alcoholic. And so, and he had schizophrenia, and I didn't know what that was. I took him to one of those treatment programs, and they were hollering and screaming at him. And I said, leave my brother alone. I'm taking my mother, gonna pray him up out of this, right? And so he suffered from the age of 19 to the age of 58. And I couldn't do anything to heal him. I couldn't help him. I felt so helpless. So that's why I came into this arena, hoping that I'd be able to help some other person.
Siri, you want to make some comments on that? And I really want to thank you for your openness, because the only way we can handle this is to be honest.
Mhm.
Be honest where we're coming from, wherever it is, be honest. And when people can see that, they can also see how they can grapple with some of the things they're dealing with. Siri?
Yes. I think in terms of my family and and relatives and drug and alcohol addiction, I was too young to to know what the causes were. I mean, I can go into the scholarship of it and talk about what the research says, et cetera. But as far as like on a personal level, addiction, I saw it, but I was too young to know what the reasons were behind everything. So my perspective was from that of like a child. So when and that's I mean, that shaped how I looked at them too. So I saw the conflict that it caused, the conflict it caused between family members because of addiction. And but for example, it helped me to see their humanity. I saw that humanity uh, of people who were addicted to alcohol and other drugs, more so than I think some of the older people in my family did. You know, so for example, my uncle would come over. He would, you know, he'd want to see me. He'd ask to see me, lift me up, throw me up in the air, catch me, and I always knew he smelled funny. And I like to smell the smell. I like to smell the smell when he would come over. If he hugged me, I know that I was going to get a strong whiff of this smell from him. You know, so you know, sometimes you know my mother would be watching and maybe he throw me up a little too high or something like that, and she'd come over and be like, "Stop." So I saw the humanity in them. I knew that he was someone who drank alcohol, but he was also loving, supportive, encouraging, have relatives who are in jail. But again, I saw their humanity because my uncle who was in jail, he would make things and send them to us. You know, so I think he made my mother a cigarette lighter made out of tobacco. And I thought that was just amazing, you know, how he could do something like that. Had another uncle who was addicted to and was a brilliant carpenter. So I was a child, but what I got from that is just a perspective that helped me to see persons who are struggling with an addiction as full human beings, as more than that, you know. So there was a breakdown. Of course, I watched the effect that drugs and alcohol had on families, including my own, but I still feel that I had a lot of community, you know, even in the midst of it. So, for example, we had issues with gentrification and relocation of jobs and left a lot of damage in the inner city of Chicago. But at the same time, I had people in my neighborhood who were business owners, good relationship with people who were in our building who would watch us, tell on us, me and my sister, if we did something wrong, and give us jobs. One of my first jobs was turning people's cable back on because I had enough time and nosiness to watch the cable man come and turn people's cable off. And I figured out I was small enough to get through fences, and I figured out how to turn people's cable back on. But yeah, people in my building paid me for that. Look, I felt like I had a community. I had a strong community, even in the midst of gang activity. There were gangs in my neighborhood that caused a lot of problems, but also looked out for me, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, so you're, uh, you were born what year?
79.
79. Yeah, so you're in this period of transition where the drugs really hit the Black community in the mid 80s, when the intelligence agencies, the police, everything really dropped these in heavy. And so you're kind of in the transition period where the community is still got a lot of strength. And then Chicago's a special Black community. It's huge. It's got a Southern base, strong Mississippi and other Southern elements, got a lot of strengths. A lot of people from Chicago treat it like a nation. Dorothy, who used to be chair of Black Studies, like her fix is to always go back to Chicago. And I know your thing is to get back for other reasons as well, but it seems like Chicago has got some special hold on people who are from there. Is that true? Siri, you gotta unmute.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. It's a unique place. My mother and my father, they came of age during the Black Power movement, so there was a lot of ethnic pride in our household, and of course, Chicago. There was and right now it's completely transformed. The near downtown area shows great signs of gentrification. It's almost unrecognizable in some places, but I was there to watch that start happening, to see places move, jobs move to the suburbs. And during my time, the 80s, early 90s, there were a lot of empty lots, vacant lots in Chicago, and a lot of bad things happened in those empty lots. But that was evidence of what you talked about earlier, the shift in the job market. Jobs moving out of the city to the suburbs, also overseas, and now we're dealing with automation and the impact that's having as well. And I think that also in Chicago, like I said, there were a lot of business owners, there were a lot of places to go to. My parents enrolled me into the Center for Inner City Studies, which was had an African-centered model of cultural enrichment and community engagement. And I took classes in hieroglyphics there. There's also the influence of the Black church in Chicago and the Nation of Islam in Chicago. And Chicago people know the influence of the Black church and the Nation of Islam in Chicago has little to do with religious affiliation. People who are not Muslims at all, who go to see Minister Farrakhan speak or Reverend Wright speak, for example, or who are not Christian at all, and who are Christian or Muslim, but the influence of those religious institutions is great beyond religious affiliation. So there's another unique aspect of that, the influence of the Hebrew Israelites as well. There's a really unique kind of series of factors that influence Chicago. And I haven't even talked about politics.
Yeah, people may not know what you're referring to. Center for Inner City Studies, which is now the Center for Jacob Carruthers Studies, was and is to this day a very important center for transmitting African history and African culture. And I'm sure that the classes you took were under the direction of Dr. Jacob Carruthers. He was the one that set that up. And he's one of the greatest scholars. In fact, next week, Dr. Theophil Obenga will be on the 21st. He and Dr. Carruthers, when they were both alive together, they were equals as the very best on ancient Egypt in the world, ancient Kemet. Now Dr. Obenga is singularly the best on the planet. And he was a humble brother who was well-informed and was passing his knowledge on to the Black community. What did you mean by the influence of these groups, the Black Church, the Nation of Islam, and other groups going beyond religion? What did you mean by that?
Because for example, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, for example, had influence in communities, community engagement, and politics, political influence that Black people pay attention to, regardless of whether they attend church or not. Same with Minister Louis Farrakhan. And I'm not a Muslim, for example, but I have a vivid memory of, this is just one example, but there was a particular store that was owned by a Arab store owner in in the community there, but they were selling outdated food. And so this is one of the most courageous things I've seen happen, period. And there were guys from the Nation of Islam who came there, and they warned them to stop selling those goods. And they didn't. And they came back and they took the things off the shelves that were outdated, and they took them away. They took them out of this. That was one of the boldest things I've seen. So I have that memory. I'm not a Muslim, but the influence that the Nation of Islam has on the consciousness of Black community in Chicago is great. And that's what I mean by it extends beyond. People have a respect for it beyond personal religious affiliation.
Mhm. Yeah, just going back, and Brianna, you want to, you're muted, unmute. In the discussion on alcoholism that you, Brianna, had, and that tended to be for the older generation, more of the addiction than anything else. And then drugs come in as they're brought into the community. And there were some there already. But on a wholesale level, mid 80s, that's a destabilization move the government makes. But in terms of alcoholism, I think that that is a disease of oppression. And then a lot of us are not conscious of it. And a lot of Blacks, we're in denial when it comes to the reasons that we're on it. We're even in, of course, that's a natural for a drug addict or an alcoholic to be in denial that they're addicted. Mm-hmm. But in this particular case, we're in denial on why very often. Mm-hmm. Native Americans drink knowing what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And knowing it's going to lead to death, and they don't want to do it, but they know they're a conquered people. They know they're on reservations. And so they're in such a negative environment that, you know, alcohol and drugs now, but alcohol especially, is something that has an effect on them. Of course, it was also, they were surrounded by it, by whites. And so very often in Black communities, it's a denial of cause. And one of the things that I see, for example, I have a great cousin, and he don't mind me telling this. He was an alcoholic for probably 30 years. All his brothers were, his father was. All the girls were in church. They were not. And he finally got off after 30 years. I won't go into all the details of how, because I checked my family stories out. So the sister told me one story, he told me another. And I know what the sister told me was actually why he got off. I won't go into that. But what's interesting is after 30 years or so, he got off alcohol. And this was his comment. He said, don't get me wrong. It's not that I wanted to be an alcoholic, but it was the best experience of his life, meaning that when he got off, he had become a transformed person. And so his life is now dedicated to helping other alcoholics get off alcohol. He runs halfway houses. He owns real estate and people rent rooms. He makes money this way, but it's mainly to help people. And you can't get in unless you're recovering. And if you are still in it, he's not taking you, you know? So, and he's a very kind and was always a very kind person. This is Siri's point. They saw the humanity in the people. And in fact, I would argue one of the reasons why under oppression, you're prone to this is your humanity, is your sensitivity, and all the crap that you see. And then the rage. I saw the rage in some of my family members who had rage, and that rage, the alcohol was one way to get out of it. You know what I mean? And then the denial, sometimes it could kill you if you didn't finally get off. So a disease of oppression. And you have a friend that I had as a student. What was her name?
Gloria.
Gloria. Gloria was she's best friend of Brianna and one of my best students. And she had been an alcoholic. I think she had been on drugs. And she had got off and she went to school and, like you, got a master's degree, social work. She's helped a lot of people. And so I asked her to write a paper on what caused people to go on alcohol and what was some of the causes of Black people for getting off. And I think the group she studied mainly were Black males.
Mm-hmm.
And her conclusion was low self-esteem was a driving thing that drove addiction. And she said that the main reason that people got off was usually the loss, the feeling you're going to lose something. And one of the biggest losses that Blacks faced that could lead them to get off of alcohol was the loss of family and the loss of respect of their family members. And so I remember that study, but I remember her because I see her at concerts. You tell me she's moved out of the state now. Beautiful lady. And a lot of that beauty comes from what she learned in life as she went through the struggles and then got off of it and then became a caring, she was always a caring person, but had tools now to care for others. And I always say people that go into social work, I have the highest respect for you because it's about caring. It's not about money. You're not in it for money. You know what I mean? And some of our best leaders come out with that background as opposed to lawyers. I'm not against lawyers, by the way, but I'm just saying that there's a feeling of concern. Ron Dillon's social worker, you know what I mean? There are a bunch of others who have had that kind of drive. So, I think those insights are important. So I think I got out of this, but you may want to add some more. What inspired both of you, Ms. Moore and Siri, to become engaged in the kind of work you're doing to help your people?
Well, I mentioned a little bit about my brother, so that was one reason. And then after I got into recovery and started to recognize and see people who were struggling with their selves, their low self-esteem, their no esteem, their lacking having a voice, not being able to tell themselves the truth, which is denial. My mother always said, you could lie to anybody, but when you start lying to yourself, you really got a problem. And so that's what the disease of addiction does to you. It tells you it's not that bad. And it tells you, you got to get up and move. You don't have it. It's not a matter of choice. It's a matter of biological and mental and spiritual. And you will move when it said move. And that's part of the trauma as well. And then I also learned, one of the amazing things I learned once I had 5 years clean, I really, this almost took me out. Because once you get 5 years clean, you like too far in and too far to go back. And I just like I talked loud and was visible and all that everywhere else, I was also that way in the fellowship. And so, everybody knew me, and I was like, I was just getting in, and I was missing the partying and being with drug addicts and all of that too, right? And so one day, I thought about a butterfly, and I thought that the butterfly, when the butterfly turns to a caterpillar, I thought that the caterpillar went off its own way and the butterfly flew away. And when I learned that the caterpillar died, I almost got loaded. I was like, I can't have two lives. I have to give up my old life for this new life. What about the people that it was really, really traumatic for me. And then like 20 years later, I learned that the butterfly goes through a metamorphosis. It gives up itself so that the butterfly can live and be free. And so that's where I am today, the butterfly, living and being free, enjoying my life and helping other people. When Gloria, when you go to San Francisco State to get your master's degree, you have to have an internship. And Gloria was a social worker at San Francisco General Hospital. and she worked the graveyard. I mean, that shift from 4 to midnight. And so that allowed me to go to school because I wasn't fortunate enough to be able to quit my job and then go to school. I had to go to school, take care of my baby, and do this 24-hour internship. That's 3 days a week. And Gloria was my supervisor. And so she taught me how to be with people when they were sick. And I was like really mean to her because she just kept going to school, going to school, going to school. And I said, you're just a professional student, right? And I jumped on her professional student bandwagon. And she was there to help me when I had to take do this internship for 3 days a week. And so I learned how to be with people and how to care for people. And what I also learned is that I didn't want to be a medical social worker, that I wanted to be in administration and planning so I could be part of the people that make some decisions around the policy that impacted our people on social services, on welfare. And I remember going into these meetings, these higher up meetings with all the big muckety mucks of human services, and I couldn't say anything because I thought that I was my mother called it split nose verbs, that I didn't have perfect English and I didn't know how to speak perfectly. And so my voice was silenced. And I remember there was a young white girl there. I hated her because everything I thought she could say out loud, right? And then one day they started talking about changing AFDC to TANF, and that young women could go to check out 5 programs. And that touched me. I was like, may I give you another way to look at this? I got my voice. I found my voice when I started talking about my people. I said, you have young women that are coming out of Hunters Point on the bus. They got 3 children that have to get to different schools. And then you want them to go down to the financial district where people don't look like them. They don't sound like them. And that they are not going to be successful with that. Oh, well, what do you think we should do? I said, how about just a couple of programs and give them some support and some bus tickets and some childcare so that they can go and be successful, and teach them how to operate in those environments and how to dress. That's a great idea. Bam, it became policy. I was like, uh-oh, you in trouble now. So I really enjoyed that administration and planning. And then after they did the women, they started to focus on the men. And they called them non-custodial parents. Well, you call a Black man a non-anything, he's not going to show up for you. And so I said, this is not the way to do this program either. I said, in Los Angeles, they have a program called Responsible Fatherhood. How about we name our program that? If you call them non-custodial parents, they're going to step up to be a non-custodial parent. If you call them a responsible father, they will step into being a responsible fatherhood in the program. Bam, policy again. I was like, okay, this is good. This is good. So I started to do what I do. A friend of mine said, I want you to do administration and planning. And I thought that he was crazy. As a matter of fact, Janae's husband said, I want you to do administration and planning. And it was the best decision that I ever made, because I could be on that end of giving back and writing policy that would impact and affect our children and those children with their mothers and without their mothers, or the children that were with their fathers as well.
So as you put forward your ideas, it gave you confidence.
Yes.
And then you put forward more ideas and it gave you more confidence.
Yes.
So that point you made earlier, the point you made earlier, as you think, so you are.
Yes.
And it puts you in a different framework.
Yes.
C.O.R.E, what inspired you to do the kind of work you're doing now?
It started with research, I believe. So with research and learning how to do research, project from beginning to end. And I got that at Temple University, empirical research. And being able to do that in the kind of class that I had, it was a very challenging one, taught by a lady by the name of Sonia Peterson Lewis. And after finishing that class, knowing that I could do that, that gave me all of I felt really confident about my ability to do research and just wanted to do more of it. But then becoming a teacher, teaching assistant, and then teaching at the college level in a full-time position, I was able to see the impact that specifically Africana studies could have on transforming students, particularly Black students' consciousness, and how it gave them also a sense of agency and empowerment. And hearing people come back and talk about how they put their knowledge to use, that gave me a strong sense of accomplishment just in doing what I do as a teacher on a daily basis. And then starting to do mentorship and advising and helping students see pathways forward for them. And that was the other thing I think that gave me that sense of belief in what I was doing. But also going to, you mentioned Dr. Noble's, I had a chance to work at the the Center for the Advanced Study of Black Family Life and Culture, and to start to see how Africana Studies scholarship could be used to engage in direct service, specifically with Black families, and for the purpose of like alcohol and other drug prevention, which was what was going on when I was working at the center for that time. But those are some of the things I think that gave me that motivation and love for what I do, in addition to needing my own mentorship, which I have to thank Dr. Tashaka for a great deal.
Well, that's mutual because I learn a lot from you. And in fact, the book you did on Black masculinity, it was very well researched. And then I could see in it better, I could see how the culture plays out in that in a very profound way, which we're going to get into in a minute. And I think that, you know, your comment about yourself and Brianna, each one of you found your own light, your own gift, and you pursued your gift. And you, Brianna, you knew that you wanted to be more in leadership to affect things, to affect change. And I think that's real key in people finding their way, is to find their gift, their light, follow that. And in the previous series, you know, we were going through C.O.R.E or destiny or the C.O.R.E. We all come here for a purpose. And when you get aligned with a purpose that's involved in helping others, then that's when the real joy comes in. And Brianna, your point about low self-esteem and no self-esteem, I thought that was a real interesting one. You were in real trouble, no self-esteem. That is really speaking to how important identity transformation is, knowing yourself and loving yourself, both your personal self in terms of your gifts, but your ethnic self as a Black person, seeing the beauty that you carry within yourself. And so those stages of transformation, we call six-fold stages to mental freedom, are really key. Brianna, put your thing on, you're on mute, put that back on. Get off of mute, yeah. So those two comments I think are very important. And then Dr. McDougall's point about the Dr. Wade Noble's experience, very important. You have any stories on that one? And for people that don't know, I think most people that watch this show know that Dr. Wade Nobles is one of the pioneers in the Black psychology movement and a leader in African-centered thought, as well as a family man, a proud grandfather, as well as father and good husband. And I think one of the brilliant things he did was focus his emphasis in Black psychology on the family. And that was a real smart decision. So you got any Dr. Noble stories?
Yeah, I have a few. Well, I was going to reward, I said that I was never, the first place if I ever left the country, the first place I was going to go was Africa. And I was talking to somebody. I said, I want to go to Ghana. And they said, oh, you should talk to Dr. Nobles. He takes a trip every year. I was like, wow. I was like, okay, I'm coming out of the elevator. Here he's walking down the hallway. I was like, okay, this is really meant to be. I said, Dr. Nobles, you don't know me, but I want to go to Africa with you. He said, okay, just go on my website and sign up. And so he did a study tour. And so you could go and you could do tie-dye or go to a school or go to a hospital. So we went to the hospital, and being Americans, they had us writing out everything. You don't know anything about this series. Carbon paper. They had us writing things out on carbon paper, right? And so we got this bright idea. Well, let's just buy him a copy machine, like just American going in, taking over like we do. And then we started thinking, well, then what about copy paper? And what about toner? And what about electricity? It's like, well, maybe we should just donate some money to so there were like 10 women in the hospital, and we just paid for their hospital bill, which totaled to be $10 US. And so we watched the women, I watched the woman giving birth, and she wasn't hollering and screaming, it wasn't all that noise. And I asked the doctor, said, does she feel the pain? What about the pain? So she was snapping her finger like that. And she said, oh, no. All that hollering and screaming make you have more pain. Just snap your fingers when you feel it. So anyway, she named her baby Brianna. And so I went there twice, once with Dr. Nobles, and then I went again with Asa Hilliard, Naeem Akbar, and Dr. Nobles. And I was like crazy. I was like in total royalty. The only person who wasn't there was you. So that was wonderful. So then I met a man over there and married him and brought him over here. And then Dr. Nobles performed our jump in the broom ceremony. And he told him, you know, you're from Africa and I am an elder in Africa, and this is my daughter. And so you owe me a cow. Where's my cow? So Francis got so nervous, he didn't know what to do, right? So I just have wonderful, wonderful memories of Dr. Nobles. But the most important one was at San Francisco State, when we were being fed all of this white indoctrination about social work. They didn't have any information on Black social workers or any of the social movements that were happening for Black people during that particular time that they were talking about. They were only putting forth white people. And so another friend of mine, Sharon, she found out about that Dr. Nobles had this session every Wednesday at 12 o'clock, and he called it Chicken and Juice. And so we would go there and get the injection of Blackness that we needed to be able to survive in that institution. And what I did as a result of having that force behind me is every time we would go to class, Dr. Jerry Shapiro's class, and he would be talking about what white people did. He had a good heart. I really appreciated him. And I said, so how does this impact the Black community? Oh, well, I don't have any information about that. And so I would stand up and I would pass it out. I said, well, I do. I said, you know, you're going to have all these white social workers going into my community, trying to help my people. And you don't even know how to get in the community. You don't even know how to get into the projects at all. And so they're not going to let you in. Nobody's going to tell you anything. So you need to know, you're going to go there to help my people. You need to know about my people and what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And so, and then I was encouraging all the other students of color, you know, I don't know anything about Asian people. I don't know anything about Latino people. You need to give that information to people so we know how to serve your people. That's your responsibility being. Of course, I was the oldest person in the class as well. And so in administration and planning, then we had to go to all of these CBOs, community-based organizations, and come back and give a report on them. So they would go out and come back with this report. I said, who's in leadership at that organization? Oh, I don't know. I said, well, what color are the people that are on the front lines? Oh, well, I don't know. So then people started going out. The leadership is white and the people that are on the front line match the community. And so I said, it's your responsibility to make sure that you know who's in leadership and why aren't more people who look like us in leadership. So I was always pushing and encouraging and nudging and everything. And it was a result of the support from Dr. Nobles that just really made me know that, you know what, you have something to say, I want you to say it. So that's my support.
And I imagine it helped you with some ideas in terms of some of your work around trauma later. We'll go into that later. But that background, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to you again, Ms. Moore, and then Siri. coming out of your generation, Black freedom, Black power generation, how did Black folks in that generation, which is mine,
Mhm.
view
Our
trauma?
generation.
How did they view trauma? Can you also define what you mean by trauma? How does our generation view trauma, and how does that differ from how the younger generation views trauma? Do you see any differences in how the older and younger generations experience it?
Yes, I think one of the things, the most interesting information I just recently heard, because I'm a therapist. I am I'm not trying to use the word trainer anymore because training is what you do for dogs, and I help develop people. So I'm changing that to like learning events. So I'm trying to undo that language there. But one of the things that I think is really, really important to know is that when you have grief over something that you lost or some trauma that you had, you have to work through that grief. And nobody does it on anybody else's timeline. It's like a footprint or an imprint. You do it the way that it works best for you, as long as you do it. This research talked about how Black women do not process their trauma, their grief. They hold on to it. And we die 49% more of congestive heart failure than any other group. And I believe it's because we hold this grief in our hearts and we don't let it go. We don't work it out. We hold on to it. That's why we drink alcohol. That's why we are in damaging domestic violence relationships. And that's why we don't even know that. We don't recognize it until the pain gets to be so severe, and then you get sick as a result of that. I think my generation had the notion of you keep your business to yourself. Don't put my business in the street, right? And if your business got in the street, then it was a sense of shame that you were in that you mother and father are fighting in the home, or that somebody's drinking alcohol but not telling anybody, or somebody's using drugs. So all of these secrets, you're only as sick as your secrets, was one of the main themes that we had in the fellowship. So telling about yourself and talking about yourself and sharing with yourself is what helps to heal. And so our generation didn't learn to do that. It wasn't okay. You can't talk about that, because if you told too much of your business, and then it might get back to the white man. And if you were doing something illegal on welfare, or you didn't have enough money to pay for this, and you ran a little game over here, or you had to hold that secret in the family. You don't go out there telling my business. I'm gonna hurt you by my business. And so I think that is why we, as Black women, are, I don't rest very well. I have a son, and he's 46 years old. He's never been to jail. He doesn't smoke cigarettes. He's a nice, kind family man. He has one wife and 2 children, and people in the community love him. And I worry about him because of the rate that Black men are being annihilated for no reason at all. And he's 6'5" tall. He's educated. He has a good corporate job. He's a nice, healthy man. And I don't rest. And every time the phone rings, I jump like that. And many, many Black mothers live and experience that. And they could have successful children, or they have children that might have their foot on the other side of the street, as I call it. But I think that our generation has to be able to not be afraid of those children because of the trauma that they have experienced, the decades and decades and decades of drug abuse and alcoholism and addiction in their families, grandparents being addicted, mothers being addicted, younger grandparents, and children with all these different levels of wounding. I read some research the other day that the number of children who have witnessed gun violence, witnessed little children seeing somebody get shot down. That's why when it shows on television, and I'll go into that when I talk about my trauma piece, you are remembering that. That's called vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is some trauma that happens to somebody else that you witnessed. So you seeing George Floyd on the ground with that white man murdering him with his knee on his neck and his shades on his head and his hand in his pocket, you remember that. that makes an imprint on you. And it impacts your mind, body, and spirit. And that is what trauma is. Seeing that over and over and over again, it's a conditioning that says you're not worthy. You're not worth the stuff underneath my shoe. I could have your knee on your neck and the whole world could see it. One time my son had this thing on his phone. And so when you have trauma, you want me to go into that now? You want to wait a little bit later?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, you see that all right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's clear.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the other part.
That's good.
Okay, so a little bit about stress, just really quickly. So stress is when something from your senses is exacerbated, something you see, something you hear, something you smell, something you feel, something you taste. So you have a situation, you see something, and then you feel stress. You feel it on a sensory level, and you get anxious, and you start shaking, and you might start to perspire. But when that stress goes away and you still are experiencing these feelings, that now is anxiety. The stress continues even after the stressor is removed. You feel like there's some doom. You can't manage the stress level. It could cause you to have a panic attack. It's like a racing heartbeat, sweaty hands and feet, and even difficulty breathing. Difficulty to even gasp a full exhale. That's why when you're feeling that way, what you want to do is just take a deep breath into the count of 4, hold it for 1, and out to the count of 5. And that will help to reverberate your body so that you can recalibrate yourself and come back to yourself, right? And then chronic stress is the response to emotional pressure suffered for a prolonged period of time. Can we say pandemic? In which the person feels they have no or little control. It can occur in response to everyday stressors as well as the exposure to traumatic events, which I'll show you a little clip from in a minute. And so some of the causes of chronic stress, you could lose your hair, you start having headaches, heart disease, poor health. That's why we were more impacted by the pandemic because of our immune system, because of the chronic stress that we live in day after day after day, right? I'm a Black mother with a Black son. That causes me chronic stress. And then I see it played out on television, all of the community. I can't even watch the news. You know, I always talk about, you remember this, Dr. Tashaka, they had the news on 6 o'clock, Walter Cronkite, 30 minutes, in and out, right? 12 o'clock, the TV went off. Remember that? And so now we have 24-hour news cycle. All day, even if you don't want it, it's still popping up. That causes chronic stress. And so these stressors, daily stress, environmental triggers, stressful events, stressful emotions, and stressful relationships, where we as Black people feel unappreciated and unsupported a lot of the times. And don't say anything about that. That causes trauma, and it will kill you. Congestive heart failure. So situations that identify some stressors, you have a perception of an event that you can't control. You have these words in your head that go around over and over and over again. Oh my God, I'm wearing a mask. I'm never gonna be able to. Remember when they had the toilet paper? There was no toilet paper. You went to Costco, you couldn't get toilet paper. Walgreens, grocery, you couldn't get toilet paper at grocery outlet. That was very, very traumatizing. And so your emotions and your thoughts kick in, and then you go into fight or flight mode, which I'm talking about in a minute. But we have also an automatic system that tells us when we're okay and when we're not okay. And we call that fight or flight. So I'm gonna slip that one. So you have a traumatic event, and it equals an event, an experience, and an effect. And it's an actual threat of harm or danger. So just let's use the pandemic. And then you experience fight or flight or freeze. Your body automatically knows. That's just the automatic response. It knows when you're gonna fight. Fighting is fighting back. Flight is running, or frozen. When I was watching that man with his knee on that neck, I got frozen. I was so traumatized, I was frozen. And my brain said, get up, turn the TV off. But I just couldn't. I was helpless to escape. And then my body and brain gets overwhelmed, and I call it, the effect is disintegration to dysregulation. All the parts of you, you don't know whether to stand up or sit down. You don't know whether to go forward or go back. You feel discombobulated. You feel dysrhythmic. You don't have your rhythm. You don't know which way to turn. Addiction does that, and trauma does that, and stress does that. And finally, it has lasting effects, adverse effects, because what happens is that you have cortisol. That's a drug that is meant to calm you down. And these are the noticeable effects. Your pupils dilate, your mouth is dry, you have a constant surveilling, always looking around, paranoid, thinking somebody's gonna come up behind you. How many of us in our generation, Dr. Shashaka, couldn't sit at a table with your back to the door? Don't know who's coming in the door? No, I don't care how big and strong he was. I'm sorry, baby, I can't have my back to the door. And then your neck and shoulders, most people who say they're stressed out, their neck and shoulders are very, very tight and tense, which is a result. These are the noticeable effects. But the effects that you don't notice or see are these. So cortisol is the drug in the brain that is released to calm you down. But if you get too much of it in your system, then these are the effects of it. Your blood pressure and your blood sugar goes up. Your immune system is impacted. That's what happened to us. That's why we died more as a result of the pandemic, because of our immune system being compromised. And then if you have too much cortisol, your brain gets ready to go and it gets ready to fight, and you can't go to sleep. And it stops your regular systems, and then oxygen and nutrients, the muscles get shunted. And then finally, when you move from trauma to stress, chronic stress, trauma, and now you have depression. And the depression impacts the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. Blunted emotions is what's key here when you're feeling depressed. Like you used to have do things that brought you joy, and you no longer have joy for anything anymore. The things you used to love, you no longer have love for that. People get on I call it your reserve nerve. Everybody you're prickly. You have no grace for other people. You have no patience and no kindness. And so that's when we have to just take ourselves in, slow down, and pay attention to what's really going on for ourselves. And then the last thing is the window of tolerance. So when you are feeling okay, you have this window of tolerance. And in your window of tolerance, you could deal with anything. You feel like you're the bomb.com, you're on top of the world. But when your window of tolerance closes, you can have two effects. One is hyperarousal, which means you are anxious and overwhelmed and out of control. It feels like somebody's out to get you. Some other shoe is about to fall. Or you can have hypoarousal, where you're like zoned out and you're in that frozen state I talked about in a traumatic event. And it's not something that you choose. That's the most important thing, is that it takes over your body. You don't choose it. It's how your body operates. Okay? So that's my story on trauma, stress, and anxiety.
Very good. And I know there's a lot for people to digest, and people need to go through some experiences on this with someone like you that can, particularly people that need this. I just want to share a few things here. Mm-hmm. I'm 82 years old.
What?
I have some people have heard this before, but others have not. Seriously,
Right.
I have an antioxidant score of 93,000. Most people don't know what that means, but that's a test of your cells, the health of your cells. It's the most important physical test you can get. Highland administers that test here. Some hospitals do. I was looking for my little score, but I don't have time to pull it up. It's a little machine that you put your finger on, and it registers the health of your cells. Basically, presence or absence of nutrients, particularly fruits and vegetables in your system. It registers your ability to resist disease or the presence or absence of free radicals. When you have a high score, it slows down aging. And that's a normal thing. You should not be physically at the age you are. You should be a lot younger.
Okay.
I should point out something. In enslavement, while the average age was around 50, 51, you had people living to 126, 123, longer than anybody lives on the planet today. And yet they were under this terrible vice of enslavement, but they brought in African spirit systems, both in terms of diet and in terms of attitude and in terms of support. So I'm saying this about myself because as Siri's heard this before, a few people on the show have, I'm a strategist first. And so my first strategy is my own health. I believe what some people say, your health is your wealth. Well, I believe it. And I've been practicing it for a good 50, 55 years. I used to have a weight problem. So that was something that I had to practice by getting in the gym. You know what I mean? But other than that, I had a strategy for longevity, living past 100 and being healthy. I'm 82 and there's nothing, I have no pain and none of those anxieties that you listed there, none of them. So here's a key point I want to make. The natural state of being a human being, even when you're under oppression, if you know how to handle it. And here's the key thing. There were some African Americans who went to Suriname. I believe it was in the 70s. Suriname is in South America. One of my best students comes from Suriname, beautiful brother. And these are Blacks who were brought into the rainforest of South America. Many of them escaped and went into the rainforest. Many of them never experienced slavery. Others did, and they fought. And so when these Africans from Harvard went to Suriname, these Suriname people, particularly the king of one of the nations, asked him, "Are you still oppressed?" They had to think because they're from Harvard. They don't really believe they're oppressed, but they had to say yes. So they said yes. I don't really believe. They thought they were oppressed. Right. So his question to them was, if you're oppressed, he had only one question: are you still fighting? The best cure for stress, for all of these things that, trigger all of these things that come out of oppression is being engaged in a struggle to fight those systems in your way, because everybody has their way, you know what I mean? But not to be engaged is to then bring the stress on you.
Yes.
So I'm saying this, and I'm going to give an example here. I haven't given this example before, but here I need to give this example because you made the example of what Black women fear, which is their sons or daughters, but especially their sons' lives could be taken away at any time. The key word here is fear. And the key thing about fear is it's not real. It's an illusion. And I know there's a term that people have for fear. It basically means that it's made up. It's up in your mind.
False evidence appearing real.
There you go. My wife had quoted that. I said, oh, that's brilliant. Well, a lot of people know what it is. So you know what it means, but at the same time, fear keeps coming up in our vocabulary.
Yes.
Because our greatest fear often is death. And I understand why. You're going to leave this body. It was like your fear of the caterpillar, leaving a state of consciousness. But then you realized what that meant.
Mhm.
It was a transcendence because it really wasn't death.
Right.
It was a new life. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so fear of death is a fear we have. Is probably the greatest fear. We don't know what it is.
Right.
And if you know what it is, I've seen it. You know what I mean? It's a beautiful thing if you're a good person. Now, if you're not, and good means positive versus negative. We all got both. So the
Right.
question is in the balance, which weighs out more?
Right.
Because on the other side, if you're on that negative, well, then I don't know if you should fear it, but I know it ain't something you should look forward to. So here's the key point. The ultimate thing about the state of being healthy is having a state of internal peace, being at peace with yourself. Now, some of us don't have it, not because of oppression. We have discord because of different inner issues. Psychology doesn't explain all of this. And those different issues are not necessarily stressful, but they are ones that, you know, are don't leave you feeling like you're peaceful all the time.
Exactly.
I gave the example when I was going through Coltrane. Coltrane had a lot of issues inside of himself. It had to do with him not believing that he was that good as a musician, and he wasn't. In the beginning, he wasn't.
Mhm.
And so the drive was to work hard to become that.
Yes.
So to have that inside of you, that's normal. But here's a key point that I want to make. This fear of the police, you know, it just seems to be passed on that it's a normal thing that we need to teach our children, you know, be careful of the police, don't do this, don't do that. And it's understandable. And there's some things you do need to teach.
Mhm.
My mother never taught that. And it may be because of the way she was raised, and I don't know, but she never taught that. And my father was absolutely fearless. And so we never got those teachings.
Okay.
And so when George Floyd was being killed, all the people around him did nothing. I don't put them down for doing nothing. I know there was a concern that if they did, they'd be shot. And it was good that there was one young lady there that filmed it. And that got you a half of justice. It took the whole world to demonstrate to put somebody in jail for 20 years for something that he should have been fried for. And I'm not for capital punishment, but in this case, I'd make an exception. Fry the boy. I'd make an exception. So I want to give you an example here. It was around 1971, I'm in a group called Pan-African People's Organization, successor to the Congress of Racial Equality. And we're doing martial arts training in the Hunters Point. And I have a security person on the door. And he's carrying him a little, one of these Japanese samurai things, but it wasn't illegal. It wasn't too large. And suddenly I hear a sound and we go out, and it's about 12 of us, 2 black belts, and then the rest of us Taekwondo, training in Taekwondo. And so they got a chokehold on him that will kill him. You know what I mean? So instantly, because I don't have no fear, instantly I snapped and told the guys, surround him, get around him. So we surrounded the cops, and there's 2 of them, and there's about 12 of us. And I signaled, which meant close in, close in, close in, close. And so these guys put this stranglehold on him. So I told them, I said, you know, his name is Mr. Spencer Tippins. If you want to get the information from him, take your hand off of him and say, please, Mr. Spencer Tippins, and he'll give you the information. And so these cops tried to edge to the police car, you know, and we wouldn't let them. They wanted to get their shotgun and they wanted to call for reinforcement. They didn't dare go for their guns. We were close enough. We're trained in disarming people, but it's dangerous. They might have got the gun and shot one of us. Mm-hmm. And so what did he do? Took his hands off of him, said, please, Mr. Spencer Tippins, got the information and rushed out. They drove out fast. And then my black belt said, what are you, crazy? You could have got us killed. I said, what are you talking about? I said, where we are now, if they do this to us once, they're going to continue to do this to us. I waited, nothing happened. I said, it was a risk. I didn't do that very often, But I said, in this particular case, it was necessary. And then I said, get the hell out of here. Because I knew reinforcements were coming back. So for
Right.
2 weeks, we stayed out of Hunters Point. After that, we were there every time. The police didn't bother us. Now, my point is this. The police ain't the object that you think they are. They are there to instill fear. If you have fear in you, it's going to work. If you don't, it doesn't have to. You understand? And the cops usually know who not to mess with in the Black community. So all I'm saying is fear is an illusion. And fear is something that we need to wipe out. And when you know yourself and love yourself and respect yourself, then that's the last thing you have to worry about is fear. And wherever there is fear, I've said this before in other shows, that is where you're not free. That is where you're under restriction. That's where you're under lockdown. So free yourself of that.
Okay.
And in your case, realize that 6'4" brother, that son of yours, he can take care of himself. Don't worry. Don't worry. He can handle himself. And I know you've learned this. One of the key things you have to learn that is a real key stressor, if you don't learn, is that there are situations you can't control.
Exactly.
So just recognize it.
Yes.
But you've raised a good son, so your son can handle it.
Okay.
Get some sleep, but it'll take you a while.
Yes.
But the main thing is fear. It's bull, fear of God. Bull. God didn't say that.
Right.
You hear me?
Yes,
It's
sir.
bull. You hear me?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
But it's not for you, because I think you've got more of that together. It's for people who have an investment in fear.
Mhm.
It's jive, baby. And by the way, I'm a warrior. I am about instilling fear. It's not conscious. It's not intentional. President of San Francisco State was afraid of me. I didn't intend to do that. But actually, when you're at war, when your opponent is afraid, he does irrational things. And that's good for me. You know what I mean? But it's not my intention. It's not my intention. It's people who got guilty consciences up here, got all the power and everything else and afraid. But guess what? Those cops were afraid. We had them.
Yep.
And yeah, they could have killed one of us. But guess what? Life is slow dying anyway. But it was a calculated risk and it worked. And I'm not doing stuff unless I think it can work. I'm into winning, not losing.
Yes.
You hear me? Huh?
Yes.
Throw the fear out the window. 6-fold stages to mental
My
peace
fear.
is the key to that, baby. You hear me? Key to that, you know? Dr. McDougall, your specialty is in Black masculinity. And I really enjoyed the discussions we had, a number of them, where you explored in depth concepts of Black masculinity. And I was wondering if you could talk about how do Black males view their masculinity? How does this view impact how Black males, especially younger Black males, handle issues of trauma and stress in their lives? Do you see any differences in how younger Black males and older Black males experience and handle trauma or stress?
Well, Black males view masculinity in a great variety of ways, and I think that it's not often appreciated how diverse Black males' expressions of manhood are. But relative to other racial or ethnic groups, I think Black men associate manhood with things that a lot of other men of different ethnic groups associated with, like responsibility, providing, self-determination, achievement, those kind of things. However, at the same time, though, the thing that what starts to separate or set Black men apart is the fact that they also associate manhood, generally speaking, with nurturing, spirituality, knowledge of self, morality, these kind of things that are not widely appreciated, I would say. So within Black males, there's a lot of diversity in how they understand manhood, what they place emphasis on, some of those things I mentioned, some Black males place more emphasis on or less emphasis on. But those virtues are important to keep in mind because they can be the root of healing. They can be resources that Black males can draw on in terms of healing. But when it comes to this question of like, okay, age and trauma, I think both older and younger Black men experience it clearly, but younger Black males are more likely to experience, or at least they report experiencing more incidents of racism or anti-Black maleness, gendered trauma compared to older Black men. But at the same time, they're also the ones who are least likely to be equipped with those kind of inner resources, the kinds that Ms. Moore talked about in terms of managing anxiety, knowledge about how to effectively manage emotional effects of trauma and anxiety. And not to blame them at all, because they would have to get that from somewhere. They would have to be taught that. They have to learn how to do that. And because of that, that's why when it comes to looking at Black male suicide rates is highest among the younger Black males as opposed to the older Black males. At the same time, when it comes to the methods of suicide, firearms at the top of the list, and males that are more likely to use firearms to have access, but it's so the attempts tend to be more lethal when it comes to Black males in general, but particularly younger ones. So as far as masculinity and values, again, they're expressed in so many different ways that can be productive, that can be harmful. If you take something like self-reliance, for example, it can be expressed as a sense of self-control, a sense of agency, a sense of self-belief, but it can also be misunderstood. It can be expressed in terms of social isolation, or not being able to express emotion or to deal with emotion or form relationships with other people. But it takes a kind of mentoring or learning, not training, as Ms. Moore mentioned, but to show a person how to do that, how to relax, how to assess a situation and make an intelligent decision, how to process trauma effectively, So absolutely, I think that's kind of some of the differences with older and younger older Black males tend to be better at processing than younger Black males. Not all, of course, but they tend to be.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Brianna, could you go through some of the things that you recommend for healing when it comes to trauma, depression, anxiety, grief, stress? At least some of the things that you recommend that people can do, or attitudes that they can take, or various methods for handling this.
Well, one of the things that I think is important is to eliminate fear. Fear. One thing I'm taking away today. So some things that help people to be able to navigate trauma and stress is that when we focus on the there and then, or rather than the here and now. So if you focus on what you're worried about tomorrow or what didn't happen yesterday, that's what causes stress and trauma. So keeping yourself right here in the here and now, keep your mind where your feet are. If you find yourself drifting off, that's what the mind is designed to do, drift off. And you're thinking. So meditation is helpful. Breathing is helpful. The 415 is really very helpful. One technique that I give to my clients and in my learning events, I tell people to put their hand on their forehead with their baby finger on their eyebrow, and then put the other hand at the back of your skull and press in, closing your eyes, and breathe in and breathe out. And what this does is that gives the brain a sense of safety. It feels a container. When you're traumatized, you don't have a feeling of safety. Everything is open, you're vulnerable. So this is one exercise. And then another exercise is affirmations, writing out positive affirmations. What you think about, you bring about. So saying positive affirmations like all is well. Everything is working together for my good right here, right now. One of the affirmations that I have on my desk is my income is constantly increasing. I begin now, today, to open myself to ever increasing prosperity. So I sit here and I put together learning events, and I send them out to people on my listserv, and then they send me back opportunities to present it, and they send me money. So affirmations to affirm what you want. Be careful what you tell yourself. There's a video on YouTube called RAS, Reticular Activation System. And it supports the notion of what you think about, you bring about. RAS, it's a little cartoon thing. And then one final exercise is the sensory exercise. So you sit with your feet flat on the floor, and you 5 things that you can touch and take a breath. 4 things that you can see and take a breath. 3 things that you can hear, take a breath. 2 things that you can smell, take a breath, and 1 thing that you can taste. And that helps to bring you back into the here and now, and helps to calm the anxiety that you may be feeling as a result of the trauma that you're thinking about. So just take it off of your mind, eliminate the fear, do some meditation, and prayer also is very, very helpful.
Good. One of the things I want to stress is that in the 6-fold stages to mental freedom, which goes through stages of identity transformation, there's an ideal end result in that. And there are a lot of end results because people are at different stages and their lives are going through different kinds of changes. But we're living in a society where everything is about control on the other side, domination. And these are ideas that the system operates on. And sometimes we'll react by doing the same thing, except to each other. And so there's an internal state that is the end result of that, which is true freedom. And it's the end result of this where you're in control of yourself. And the key thing I think that's important is you have to be engaged in stuff in your life to bring about change in your life and the life of people around you. That empowers you, just like Miss Brianna Moore's example in her job situation, asserting herself and gaining power in that. You've got to take a position and assert yourself in whatever way it is for the well-being of others. In her case, it was the well-being of people who they're trying to turn or keep in a victim state to empower them. You know what I mean? So in your way, do that. And as you gain power over a particular domain in your life, that is power that is healthy. It gets you out of the stressful situation. So these suggestions she's making are important. And I'm sure you all have other examples as well. And I think the key one is to know yourself. If you know the internal powers that you have, that's a way out of a lot of situations. You know what I mean? This has been very useful and very helpful. Dr. McDougall, as we start to wrap up, You referred to some of the problems that Black males face in terms of mental health. And you talked about suicide rates, homicide rates among younger Black males. What do you see as some of the causes of that? And what do you see as some of the solutions for that? And because as I understand it, the data pretty well shows even though it's rising among Black young males, the suicide rate still lower than it is among whites in general. So what do you see as the causes, and some solutions? And also, what do you think about the reality that there are also a lot of young Black males who are not in that mindset? And why is that? Yeah, you.
Sorry, I wasn't unmuted. But yes, so I mean, I think that as far as suicide is, what part of what gives it away is just to look at what it shows up alongside. You know, it shows up alongside increased unemployment rates, incarceration, educational achievement, where you have these continuous gender gaps in Black college enrollment, for example. And these are things that, I mean, the mainstream looks at, and when we see these numbers, they look normal, unfortunately, you know? But those are some of the things that it shows up alongside. They influence suicide. They have an influence on the suicide rates. And if we look at when they spike, like around what we talked about actually earlier in this show, the 80s. The 80s was when there was this big, late 80s, early 90s, the huge spike in Black male suicide rates, or increase, when I say spike, Black male suicide rates. And what do we see happening at that time? It's, again, deindustrialization. We see the height of that. We see the highest of and when it comes to availability of crack cocaine in urban centers around the country. So all of these things, and that's the start. Then if we look at the impact of automation on Black male employment for right now, you just take the truck drivers, you know, and the overrepresentation of Black males as truck drivers and the impact of automation on truck drivers. Now we're seeing the continuation of it. So underneath it all, those suicide rates for Black males tend to come from, one, internalizing failure or what are perceived as failures. You know, and we have language, unfortunately, in our community that facilitates Black males internalizing failure. Like the, you know, I don't want to use the word, but the ain't SH sugar honey iced tea phrase, you know? So if you're dealing with failure, and internalizing failure is one of the main things that leads to suicide rates. When you encounter failure and you remember that it's because you ain't, then that's one of the things that facilitates it, unfortunately. Disrupted families and relationships, like you mentioned, was mentioned earlier in our conversation. The pressure to assimilate to white masculine norms or non-threatening Black masculinity, the pressure to assimilate to that. In addition to what we generally know, the racism and oppression, the anti-Black maleness, in addition to, some people believe, and I am a proponent of this, but alienation from spirituality, from spiritual systems, because a lot of times those spiritual systems, and me not being a proponent of any particular one, But what they do is they tend to provide Black males with as they do all of us, with a belief system, a way of making or assigning meaning to the things that happen to us in our lives, positive or negative, and with communities of people to help deal with challenges that come up. So these are just some of the things that I think are behind it. Some of the things that the criminal justice, opportunity, employment, yes, structurally, but on the individual level, absolutely. Internalizing failure in the face of traumatic events, damaged relationships, family, romantic, as well as the others.
Yeah, those are good insights. I was watching a rehash of Ferguson when Ferguson first kicked off, and it was the mother of Brother Brown, who was in great pain, going through everything that Brianna had just talked about. And she kind of summarized this. She said, a Black young man, she says, a good man. I worked hard to raise this boy. She said, he graduated high school. Not too many young Black males graduate high school. Then you go and kill him. And then she made this comment, and I can't think it summarizes what you're saying, sir. And also what a young lady said when she was explaining why sometimes random violence or some younger Black males take risks that can be a danger to their life. She said, make all these attempts to do something with your life, and then you just go and kill them. It gives you no hope. You got no sense of what's the point of living. And I was telling you, Siri, a couple of weeks ago, because I called you to ask you what you thought of this. A young lady was on a show that a sister who's an activist sister here in the Bay Area has. Her name's Kat Brooks. She's a real activist sister, real conscious. And this young lady was explaining why she saw the youth sometimes making choices, young Black males making choices that, you know, were dangerous and would sometimes lead to violence. And she made this comment. She said, you're living in a situation where it appears to be no hope. So people think, so what difference does it make? You know what I mean? What difference does it make if I put my life on the line or take someone else's? And there's a saying in the streets, I'm not afraid to die, I'm afraid to live. And that, I know it's not the wholesale belief of Black youth. I know it. The majority of Black youth are in college, not in prison. There's a whole reality of there are Black youth who are dealing with this, and you don't need to be going to college to deal with this. Everybody ain't suited to go to college and don't need to. But the key point is that our community is surrounded so much by death or hopelessness that a lot of the young people, because of the way in which this system has been structured for them in this generation, feel, well, what's the point? You know what I mean? And so I think there's profound truth in that. And it's profound truth that we have to address, you know, seriously address. So there are two final questions that I want to raise, and then be the end of this discussion. One is, what do you, both of you, see as culturally relevant approaches that will be useful for our people in general and our youth in particular, in terms of empowering them to have an ability to, or believe that they have an ability to handle the situations they're in? And by the way, I'm noting that this generation is doing that. The Black Lives Matter movement is one that says that this generation has come of age, they've got a voice, and they are handling the most difficult point of oppression, which is the police collectively. And sisters are really to be given the tip of the hat for leading this on behalf of both brothers and sisters, but especially brothers. They're to be given special praise for their work. So in terms of culture, how do you see culture, African American, playing a role in turning this around?
You could go first.
Syria, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So I think I wanted to go back to something that you said, Dr. Shaka. Most Black males don't commit suicide, and I think that's like that should be our point of departure, because if we're talking about Black males, then most of them don't. And then why is that? What have they created to enhance their sense of self, to make them resilient, to forge healthy relationships, and to express their emotions in effective ways, creatively, intellectually, in terms of relationships, etc. It was one of the first interviews I ever did was with the brother T. Hassan Johnson on his channel, where they have like these dialogues about the challenges that Black males face and solutions to them. And it's just an example of a network that's used to explicate the kinds of challenges that they've, and in that in of itself is very healing, I would say. And the role of culture, I think, is to provide those kind of support systems. And also, I think family traditions, spiritual traditions, kinships, bonds, role modeling is also to give us standards that we use to evaluate the competency of educators, of healthcare professionals. It's a buffer culture, because those children of ours who are immersed in and who are exposed to their culture are less likely to, and I'm thinking of Ms. Moore's model, are less likely to allow those negative events to turn into anxiety and then maybe later depression. So culture, I think, it plays a critical role in as a protective force, but also as something that motivates and lifts self-confidence.
Well put.
Got a
Sister
minute?
Moore?
Okay. I was looking for a study that I used to put in my presentation, and they did another study with adverse childhood experiences that was updated. UCLA did a study in 2015 to identify predictors, and there were 5 domains: experience for young Black men, experience of discrimination, history of sexual abuse, history of violence in an individual's community, and a chronic fear of being killed or seriously injured. And so that speaks to that bravado that they have, that, you know, like you did with the man in the circle, right? So what I think is important in the culture is storytelling. You know, I went to a friend of mine, she's Jewish, and every Friday night they tell the story of their culture. Every Friday night, every kid can tell the story of their culture. We don't do that enough. Some families do. There's a show on the TV now that's called High on the Hog that talks about how what we brought from Africa, like okra and yams, to have that history and that culture. 4 segments. And then the last thing is positive growth syndrome. And what that is where you tell the stories of positive things that happened to you, how you made it through. Like, how did people make it through this pandemic? The way I made it through this pandemic is I started growing plants. And I knew I was an old lady because I gave them names. And I didn't even know I had this green thumb. And now my house is full with all these beautiful plants. And they helped me pull through this difficult time so that I was able to sit, reflect, and resonate on what's important to me and what strengths I have. So storytelling is one of the things that I think is important to our culture that I want to leave the group with today.
Yeah, good. I'd add one or two things. Generally, um, while there have been breaks in the culture, and we've discussed some of these before, they play out along generations. They got to do with the forces that have hit Black communities, particularly since the emergence of this hip hop generation. And so we see some material and individualistic values, for example, seeping in. And Dr. McDougall talks about how important spirituality is and drawing from that. And young girls or young ladies in this generation are going to show more strength in this area because generally the institutions that support that, they're more likely to be connected to them, like the church, even though there's a decline in young girls going to church. There's still a lot of them that are. And I'm not a Christian, so I'm not here pushing any religion. One of the things that I would say that is really important and that is manifested in our youth as a strong continuation of our culture is at the core of our being. I assert that the ethos of the African American or New African, which by ethos you mean the way people carry themselves, their distinct appearance in the world. I'm not talking about dress per se, though that's part of it. I'm talking about their attitude towards the world, their very being, their essence. And I argue this, and this is the core of what it means to be African American or New African. And it is our ethos, it is our essence, and that's creativity. Creativity is the essence of this African American, Africans here in this country. I was at a holiday celebration at San Francisco State years ago, and Dr. McDougall probably recognized who I'm talking about. When I make negative comments, I don't mention the name, but we're at a dinner. And so one person who was at the dinner, who you'd least expect to say this, and that this person's not from here. He's Black, but he's not from the United States. He said, the African American is the most creative and innovative African in the world. Now, this is a very brainwashed person that I'm referring to. But he's saying something that I didn't expect to hear from him, but he could see it. You know what I mean? And this is a highly educated person too, but what he's seeing is this great quality of art. So I think that one of the things that's manifested, a very important quality that the hip hop generation continues, is this quality of creativity. And even the way in which they express it by calling it freestyling, which is their term for creativity. My generation would call it improvisation or innovation. It's an improvement on the term because it's really describing what improvisation is. It's your full expression of freedom. And what is the essence of being a human being? It's to be godlike. Of course, it's to try to be good, try to be kind. Those are the godlike qualities. But what is God? God's a creator. The essence of being a human being is to create. And the hip hop generation has manifested that. Yeah, we're always talking about the negative side. But when the Bronx was burning, and when everything is being done to step on the popular culture, in this particular case, the artistic culture of rhythm and blues, here comes another generation. And they don't have arts in the schools anymore. You know, some of them do, but a lot of them don't. They don't have the musical instruments that my generation has. Some do, but a lot didn't. You know what I mean? And so what do? They go to the human voice. They draw from Jamaica, you know, and they start to play with records and scratch and all this stuff. You know what I mean? And, you know, word up, which is the core of African culture, the spoken word. And if you look at the early hip hoppers, the art form was the most important. Money, they didn't even know they could make money, but it was the creative expression. And then you had those who were drawn from jazz. They were usually the highest expression in the hip hop culture. And then you had those who were drawn, most were drawn from James Brown, you know what I mean? And his rhythm. And then you had those who were influenced by Malcolm X of the Black Panther Party because they were the bridge generation. But the key point is it was an extension of African-American culture. To call hip hop a culture is wrong. I pointed this out before. Hip hop's an art form. It's not a culture. It's an expression of African-American culture for the younger generation. And of course, we know the negatives in terms of how the record industry and everything has come in. Every aspect of African-American art form has been plagued by the corporate influence and the negative influences. But the key point is the creativity is, I think, at the core of this generation, and it's expressed in Black Lives Matter. It's expressed in the fact that they learned some of our best lessons and took them to another level. Group-centered leadership, not focusing on singular leaders, taking disadvantages and turning them into advantages. So we have breakdowns in communities. And so what do? They start using networks. They start using the computer and everything else to, dialogue with each other in a confusing way, because the people in power, it's very hard to identify who's leading this. This is creativity. You know what I mean? Putting Trump out of the White House is creativity. And this younger generation deserves the greatest credit for it. Because without Black Lives Matter and COVID, you'd be a step closer to full-blown fascism. You know what I mean? Younger generation, pat yourself on the back for that, because like we call our generation the Black Power, and some people call civil rights or Black freedom generation. But guess what? Everybody in that generation wasn't involved in those marches, wasn't involved in those movements, but they were part of it. And in the South, it was the masses of Blacks who backed it that made it happen. So you don't measure a generation by what everybody's doing in the generation. You look at the most conscious sectors and what they're doing to express the highest expression of creativity. So I just add that one thing. That's a hell of a thing. These youth are creative. And by the way, some of them who are in business, they learn from Ray Charles. Control your whole thing. Whatever you think about, some of them who are controlling it, Jay-Z and the rest, they got some idea of controlling something. Now it needs to be taken to another level. We need some cooperative economics. We need some empowerment where we're pooling wealth for the masses of our people. But the key point is this generation has made some improvement. You got some scholars like C.O.R.E. McDougal, and there are a number of others, hip hop scholars and others, who are doing great work. You know what I mean? Great work.
Great work.
Taking it to another level. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom for this young generation, and given what they've been hit with, it's amazing that any of us are standing, because this was some heavy ass. These hits are harder when they're institutional and global.
Yes.
They're harder to deal with, Final question is, do you all see any kind of systemic changes that need to take place? Because as both of you have pointed out, a lot of the negative suicide and stuff is driven by the conditions people are living under and being driven into the ground. And so my question is, what are some of the systemic changes that you think need to happen in this country, racially, economically, politically, and otherwise, that will, of course, promote good health? And by the way, I think for the hip hop generation, the more that are involved in these movements, the healthier you'll be. Get off your behind and apply this knowledge. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that so many systems are broken, and we're impacted by those broken systems, like housing and medical care and education, where people in other countries get all those things for free. Mm-hmm. I went to Dubai, and in Dubai, a teacher gets everything free. So American teachers are going to Dubai and teaching over there and making a lot of money because they're valued and appreciated. So first of all, our teachers have to be a part of an equitable system. Equity means that if bananas is the cure for everything, then give everybody a banana. But if you have some people that are allergic to bananas, then those people get apples. It's equity, not equality, equity. Give people what it is that they need. In terms of medical care, not everybody has good medical care. Some people retired and they have no medical care. Some people retired and they don't have Social Security. So we have to have that wealth you talked about, that we help take care of one another and try to make sure that our systems are equal for everybody, especially people who look like us. And with the new information coming out on the census that white people are being reduced, their numbers are going down, they're terrified. And so they're trying to institute systems that will paralyze us, that will cause us to stop and to think that, that we're not worthy and we can't get it done. But we can get it done, but we have to think about the future. One last thing that the guy from Amazon said back in 1991, he talked about regret minimization framework. Now this man is worth $200 billion, so he definitely knows about regret minimization framework. That you put together things and processes in your life today so that when you get to be 82 years old, then you can have a great oxygenation rate and you don't have to look like you're 82 because you're in the gym and doing martial arts and all of that. Regret minimization framework. Put together today what you need so that your tomorrow, your future, you could just sit back and make YouTube videos or write learning events and send them out from your office chair. And think about what is necessary to help other people to become healthier, both in their mental capacity, their physical capacity, but mostly in their spiritual capacity, like you mentioned, Baba. It's really, really very important. People can become butterflies. They just have to be aware and want to be aware and want to recognize to do better. And the things that you say to yourself matter. What you tell yourself matters. If you say I'm gonna be late, guess what? You're gonna be late. Say I can't pass that test, guess what? You're not gonna pass that test. If you say I'm always broke, guess what? You're always gonna be broke. You could be challenged. And I think that all of those systems are in place and it's been a long time coming for them to be dismantled, but the dismantleization is possible. And it begins with yourself.
Very good. I just want to add something before getting to Siri. When you love yourself, know yourself and respect yourself, which is a part of this transformational process we all need to go through, you are more into the future than anything else. You live in the moment, and your point about the moment is very important. You've got to enjoy the moment, and sometimes it's not joy. You learn from the moment.
Right.
But get that moment in. This is a very treasured experience we're having here on Earth. And life only strikes, I say, once at a time. Because I think you come back. But the thing is, get everything you can out of this one. You know what I mean? Yeah. But the key thing is, when you know yourself, respect yourself, and love yourself, you're spending more time on the future because you can see it. But when you're stressed out and locked down, then you think that everything is going to be a reproduction of the misery you're in at this moment, which I understand we're under oppression. This system is set up to impose misery.
Right.
Our objective is to change it.
Yes.
So I think a lot of your points all of them are very important. Siri, what do you have to say on this?
I think that this is a time I'm encouraged. by this particular time, because I'm seeing a lot of Black people who are doing their own thing, who are taking up their own projects, starting their own organizations, their own businesses, own companies, because I think this is a time that we need to draw back on that 1900 to 1930, even though it was, we're talking about like the height of Jim Crow, but also the golden age of Black businesses during that time period, and I just talked to so many of our people who are brilliant, absolutely brilliant, whose brilliance is sometimes nurtured, sometimes cultivated in mainstream institutions, but also constrained, So I think that this is a time where we need to put more weight behind and create a culture of Black people creating their own businesses, organizations, initiatives, etc. And one thing I was encouraged by was to see that the Congressional Black Caucus had invited President Theopia Jackson, because Theopia Jackson was president of Association of Black Psychologists, and they invited her to talk about mental health. And I think that that's a connection that just needs to be stronger, because access to healthcare, yes, and we were talking about mental health today, but competency to serve our people, I think that's something that the Association of Black Psychology has a lot to offer. Obviously, have dedicated themselves to studying, and people like Dr. Nobles, for example, shaping licensure and training and protocols for serving Black people needs to be a big part of it. And of course, mentorship, just preparing our young people to pursue their destinies effectively, despite what they're likely to encounter. But that competency, though, needs to have a gender component, because not always do Black men and women present their anxiety, for example, in the same way. And if our folks who are providing care are not able to identify challenges that need to be addressed, then it's also an issue. But when you mentioned it, art, it made me think this. I'm stuck in the 90s in terms of music, especially hip hop. So Nas just released this King's Disease. It's out part 1, part 2, but it shows the maturation, I think, of hip hop. The things that the lyrics are addressing, I think, is really important. And this is nothing new, because I interviewed when I was a graduate student, taking Sonia Peterson Lewis's class I told you about earlier. She had us do a project. In my project, I was interviewing middle school kids about hip hop. I was into hip hop like as a research subject area a while back. And so I was interviewing this young guy, and he was talking about how he was being, when do you listen to hip hop? When do you listen to certain kinds of hip hop was one of the questions, interview questions. But he talked about some of the trauma that he experienced, and he talked about which songs he listened to that brought him up, that lifted him up, and it's the same. I think it's the same with hip hop as it was with, say, John Coltrane, who kind of crafted Alabama as a way to help Black people deal with a traumatic event, in the 60s. And it can serve the same kind of a purpose. And it is, I believe. Of course, not all of it, but yeah, I'm in the 90s, so that's what I listen to.
90s was kind of like a golden age there. Isn't Nas influenced by jazz?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He is his particularly coming from his father, who is a blues jazz artist.
How do you
Yeah,
spell his
and
name?
which,
N
which,
A
huh? What'd you say?
not NAS.
Okay.
His full name's
Oh,
Nazir Jones. But yeah.
oh, that's
Yeah,
the
and
young man that did the cowboy thing, right?
No, that's not him. That is Little Nas X. Quite
Oh,
different.
okay.
Quite different.
I'm sorry.
some intergenerational teaching here. Yeah,
Those two quite different.
Nas is really demonstrating, as hip hop does in general, the different areas of the African American art form that hip hop draws from. And at its base, it's the spirituals, the spiritual blues, which is what hip hop is. It's urban blues. And that's what Chuck D came to the realization of. You know what I mean? And it's the younger generation, and now they're older, but they're still younger compared to some, and older compared to others. Um, that is their expression of that. But the fact that Nas is drawing from jazz means high vibratory powers when it comes to thought, deep stuff. You know what I mean? Deep.
And the kid I interviewed, he was being teased. It was because of it was colorism. It was skin color stuff that was going on at the school. But he was talking about what he listened to. He was also a small guy, so he was being for his age, but he was being picked on. But he talked about the person he said he listened to wasn't Nas, and it was I Know I Can. But that kind of dates how old the study was too. But it was I Know I Can, a song by Nas.
But it shows the depth. You know what I mean? That a little
Yeah.
kid is moved by that. What's that saying? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Same thing when Coltrane was coming up. You know what I mean? He's going in the Holiness Church, and that's influencing his saxophone, but it's taking it to another level. I mean, that's the nature of the culture. And the fact that out of enslavement, we create not only a culture, but an art form.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, the people who oppress this country do not have a culture that's indigenous to this country, it's an import and it's oppressive. It runs the place, but on the ground, it's our culture that's a culture of popular choice. And they've evolved no art form in this place, because if you're involved in the business of mass murder, genocide, slavery, stealing a neighboring country's half their land, and then calling them aliens when they come across their own land after you've impoverished them with trade agreements and everything else, you can't possibly create art. You can forget it. Individuals can. You got individuals who can sing, who can dance or whatever, and paint. And most of the stuff that I see call it art, the European Americans coming up with, is tragic stuff. You know what I mean? Art. I mean, a can, you know what I mean? A tomato can is art. I mean, some of the stuff that I see coming out that they don't know what beauty is, because when you go into the depth of inhumanity, then creativity goes out the window.
Out the window.
So the fact that we have both a culture indigenous to this place and an art form, and that art form and that culture, the culture and both popular and classical for this country and the world, is saying a whole lot. And so, as was pointed out, the demographics are shifting. It's going to be a black, brown, red, and yellow place by 2044, 2045,
Mm-hmm.
2046.
And that's
the question is, what do we do to make this a better place for our children as well as ourselves? And Brianna, I agree with you. Whatever we come up with, we need to be applying it now in our own lives, right now.
Right now.
And so this has been a very rewarding discussion. I've learned a lot. Brianna, you've given us the ABCs of the introduction. I need to learn a lot more myself, and I know a lot of people watching this show need to learn a lot more about this thing called trauma, and how do we use it in a cultural way that can help our people. And Dr. C.O.R.E. McDougall, as usual, you got a head on your shoulder, brother. And I think one of the real keys in life is, I always say two things: good character and hard work. And when you got humility, you go a long way. You know what I mean? A long way. And that's the thing I like most about you, C.O.R.E., is your humility. And Brianna, I'm just getting to know you. Boy, I love your stuff. It's bad. And I'll tell my friend that recommended you, thank you, because I'm the one that asked. I said, I need an expert on this. I don't know this stuff. He called me up. Janae Johnson. Thank you, Janae.
Thank you, Janae.
Yeah, my spiritual daughter. She's going to
Okay.
be on this show, and she's something else.
Oh my
Talk
goodness.
about some walking love. She
Yeah.
radiates it.
Yeah. And that laugh.
Oh, yeah.
Work together. And so you could hear her laughing down the hall, just come from her soul.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so any closing comments the two of you want to make before we get to comments here, see if there are any questions?
Well, just thank you so much for having me. I hope what I said was clear. And I know I split a lot of verbs, but it's okay now because I do speak English well, but I know how to communicate with my peoples too. So thank you so much. I felt so honored and blessed. Nice to meet you, C.O.R.E.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you as well. And Dr. Shaka, thank you for the invitation. It's always an honor. And I look forward to the upcoming show, especially with Dr. Obenga. And one of the things that stood out to me was that you emphasize, I think, a lot, is the importance of struggle, the importance of fighting, but also the role that it plays in healing, that engaging in resistance plays in healing, which sounds like Fanon, or even Frederick Douglass, the importance of engaging in a battle, facing fear. So
yeah, it's interesting you say that. I'll riff off of that. Frederick Douglass, he said he had reached a point where they had him at such a low level that he was barely alive. You know what I mean? In terms of having any feelings of being a human being. What brought him to life was when he attempted to escape from slavery and failed, and had to go back and to meet with Kobe, the slave breaker. And he had been given a protective charm from Africa by a African who was a diviner. And he told him, Fred, as long as you have this, no white man will ever lay your hands on it. Fred didn't really believe this stuff.
Right.
When he went to Kobe the first time, he didn't get whipped, but he said, I think it's because it was Sunday. I think it's going to be different Monday. And sure enough, Monday, Kobe tried to light into him, and Frederick Douglass beat the hell out of him. Normally, what's not pointed out, there was a sister on the plantation who was the baddest person on the plantation. She could whip any brother or sister. And so she was watching the fight. And as Kobe's getting beat bloody, he calls on her to help. And she just stands there, because I know what she's saying. Kick his butt to the ground. Understand? And what did Frederick Douglass say after that? He said, after that fight, my manhood came back. And he said, I became a free human being. He said, no man, he's referring to a white man, will ever lay their hands on me again. If so, either they or I will die, but I will never be subordinate to this system anymore. And it was from then that he plotted his escape and eventually achieved it. But you could escape and still have a slave mentality.
Yes, yes.
Fighting back was the key. Fighting back. And we all have our ways to fight back. But that is the great eliminator of stress. Please believe me. And when you have victories in your life, your thoughts will be victorious.
Mm.
And as Miss Brianna Moore has said more than once, as you think, so you are. And if you think victorious, you will be. You hear me? Huh? But if you don't, even when you achieve it, I'm talking about us as a people, we achieve victories, we don't even see it. And that's the case with some of our people right now. So I really enjoyed this. Great spirit. Thank you, Brianna. Thank you, Siri.
Thank you.
Enjoyed this so much. Now I'm going to get to these comments. I'm going to see if anybody has any questions, but let's see. Black Voltron, thank you, Dr. Moore and Dr. McDougall, for your insights and knowledge. And then he made a comment of don't confuse Nas with Nas X. Of course, that's what
I'm an OG. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's how that goes. It don't matter. I mean, you got a lesson there.
Yeah.
Roja, to be honest with myself, I'd rather march for justice than to be in a club or a bar. Right on. You got that right. And then again, this brother makes a point. I call it learning by example or learn by doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to see if there's any. My generation have to be there in order to experience this. Clubs, bars only take a father out of his home. So I try to minimize going out. In return, I can see my children more. One comment, no questions here, great work. Okay. Roja, try to teach my kids by doing the right thing, and going to prison for clout is not one. Once you learn to do the right things, adults approach them trying to find this now. Yeah. The adults approach them and say, do it to me, and they will have confidence. You want to have any comment on that, Brianna? Doing the right thing is real key. Brianna?
Doing the right thing is real key.
Yeah, he's saying right here, he's saying that he teaches through doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that doing the right thing, like the thing that keeps coming to my mind that my mom always used to say, it's nice to be nice. And it's nice to let other people know you're nice too.
Mm-hmm.
Doing the right thing, modeling it, you know, that's all we have. Just like you're teaching here today, you're modeling the behavior. You're modeling being distinguished. You're modeling cleanliness. You're modeling being dressed like an OG, right? Those things are very, very important that they have to see that.
Right on. Yeah,
Walk the talk.
as my wife says, your children are going to follow.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're not on now.
Who, me?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. You were saying something else?
No.
Okay. Yeah, so as my wife says, your children follow what you do.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk all day long, but if your talk and your walk ain't consistent, they go on with the walk.
Yes.
You know? Lao Tzu, to the entire panel, is our culture, in particular, our history and skills encoded in our genes? If this is the case, how do we access them? You get that? That's a question. Is our culture, in particular, our history and skills encoded in our genes? If this is the case, how do we access them?
That's called epigenetics. And it comes down through your DNA. And you are able to access it by having the confidence and knowing that you are all that you are your ancestors. There's some words out now that I'm not my ancestors. You are your ancestors. And the way that you access it is by talking to your elders or other elders. I remember when I was growing up, my mother would always tell these stories, and I just hated her telling all these stories. And then the kids would come over and she would talk about when she was in the cotton fields and all that. So later in my life, I'm an adult. Now I want to hear these stories. And actually, I started recording them because that's what's important to know. And that's one of the things that I love about Gloria. She has this history, this profound history of her family and the traveling from the South to the North and how they did that. You know, you should have her on, Dr. Obashaka.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, get her number.
Okay,
And
I'll send it to you.
let me have it. If
Okay.
you have it.
Yes, sir, I do.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
She's great. She's really great. In fact, having two of you on would be like a double whammy. You know what I mean?
Why the dream come true, Lord, from where we come from to being on Dr. Obashaka's show together, talking about stuff that matters. Woo!
Yeah, that'd be lovely. One of my favorite students. Epigenetics. Did you all hear that word? So that's stuff that's encoded in your genetic memory. Is that right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
Dr. Joy DeGroot talks about that.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about that. Siri Sam, I'm getting schooled in some psychology here. I know he's smiling. Okay, let's see. Roja has this comment. He says, for example, instead of beating on your children for not cleaning, just clean yourself. They are watching. My kids surprise me sometimes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The apple don't fall far from the tree.
Mm-hmm. This is Black Botron. It's our duty as older Black men, we must pass these constructive strategies to combat white supremacy to the youngsters. Yeah. Again, I was kicked out of high school. I had to get my GED, then fill out the application for FASA. Once approved,
FAFSA?
Once approved, I started college. Now it took a few years to start my first day, but it was worth it. Right on. See if there's any. My generation have all these tools to take care of our house, cars, clothes, guns, women, but somehow we ignore the inner tools such as sharing.
Mm-hmm.
What's y'all's comment on that?
Yeah, it's better. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if you could read it one more time.
My generation have all these tools to take care of house, cars, clothes, guns, women, but somehow we ignore the inner tools such as sharing. Comment?
Yeah, I think the inner tool of sharing is key and significant because what you give, you receive. What you put out will come back to you, pressed down, multiplied, and running over. So if you give out a FU, that's what you give back. But if you give out a blessing, that's what you give back. And it might not come back on you. It may come back on your kids or somebody else that you love. So sharing and giving and loving and acknowledging that there is plenty for everybody. There's enough. We have a fear. We have a way of thinking that it's not enough, and there's plenty. There's always enough.
Uh-huh. Lao Tzu, this is a question. What strategies, pedagogy can we develop that would allow us to change our state of mind or maintain it consciously? Good question. Who wants to handle this one? Let me repeat it. What strategies or pedagogy can we develop that would allow us to change our states of mind or maintain it consciously? Either one of you.
Well, I think education is a key pedagogy, and I see you have all those books behind you, Siri, and you too, Baba, reading, having yourself, and it's difficult for me as an elder to read because my brain is not tracking all those words. I'm in the Psychotherapy Institute learning psychodynamic theory now, and they have these white people have these sentences that are paragraph long. So I have learned to do audiobooks. So once I do an audiobook, I can write it down and then take it in as well like that. So know what your method of learning is and read.
Siri,
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, I know from experience the impact that Africana that learning about our own intellectual heritage, culture, and who we are, what transformative effect that can have on consciousness. But at the same time, I think we have to construct communities among ourselves where that knowledge is reinforced, is acknowledged, is recognized and respected. And that, I think, takes care of the maintaining part, because you can have the exposure and transformative consciousness, but to maintain it and nurture it, to water that garden, is like the part that's that I think takes some self-construction. You have to construct that community, I think.
yeah, as Siri knows, and I've discussed with people who watch this show, I'm finishing a book on Seba, which is the Kemetic word for teaching. And it literally means bringing the light that is within out. And so one of the things that we have to do in both how we teach and how we reproduce our systems is we have to shape systems where knowing and being are not separate. In the Western system, knowing is separate from being. You can know all you want about something, in this case, Blackness or African history. But if you use their method for teaching, you won't always be what you know, those good things. Now, our families had ways for getting us to do that. The church, at a certain extent, when it came to dying in one state, being reborn in another, had it to an extent. So this is a key one. We have to flip their system. We can't continue to use their system of teaching. Ours has to be one where to know is to be, and being is knowing. Or to put it this way, to know the truth is to be the truth. And I've shaped that, mother. We flipped that script. You hear me?
Yep.
And then Dr. McDougall made the point that we need to be dealing with what he called mentorship systems. We have retained mastery systems coming out of Africa that have produced our great masters. We need to appreciate this and be more conscious in replicating it. And now with the generational divide, it's not as strong as it used to be. John Henry Clark was shaped by masters. He had a 12th grade education, which was sufficient. He was well read, but it was the masters that he underwent training or learning from through being those aspects of them that he needed to be that transcended him to this high level. And so we need to know what these systems are, appreciate it, and make sure that they're replicated in the right way.
I wanted to recognize the work that you do, Dr. Tashaka. I don't think anybody is highlighting the unique contribution, African American contribution to African culture that way. So I think that's really important. There's big movements, of course, to focus on African American and political economic interests, but that African American, that unique African American culture, I think that you highlight, I think that's going to be extremely important in any renaissance culturally that we have.
Yeah, and we often think of culture as the holidays and the formal language. And so we think that we don't have one. A lot of the youth think that, and it's deeply in their behavior. It's deeply, but they don't know what's African. So they often don't know that a lot of what is their very lifestyle, including the way they speak. 80% of our people speak a Niger-Congo Bantu syntax language that is based on African linguistics. And we run around saying we ain't got a culture. Everybody else imitates us, but we ain't got a culture.
Right.
Really? Give me a break. Yeah, so yeah, really raising that up is important. And the reason I raised it up, it woke me up. It's what make me what I am, along with studying this African stuff. But I spend more time, as I pointed out before, on muddy waters. That's our people. Literally a great blues musician, but the muddy waters of Black folks, as I do Kemet. In fact, a little bit more. Poor frog that don't praise its own pond. I like this muddy waters pond, this soulful pond.
Wait, a
And by
poor
the way,
frog, poor frog that don't praise his old, what?
yeah, it's a poor frog that don't praise its own pond. And by the way, Sister Brianna has just seen the film on Aretha Franklin. Tell people to go see that film.
Oh,
Brianna.
see the film, and it's getting some bad reviews, but honey, it is thebomb.com, and that girl can sing, and she told the story very, very well.
Mhm.
Yes. Go see the film. Go to a nice theater where your seats can lay back, because it's 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours of heavenly soul.
Heavenly Soul, the Queen of Soul.
Yes.
And then Pamela George, I don't know if she's on here, but she sent me a picture of her and Aretha Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
Because Aretha Franklin went to Yale to give her she went to Yale to get an honorary degree, and the people told her, now don't bother her. They told Miss George and everybody, don't bother her. She said, man, are you crazy? This is the Queen of Soul. I'm gonna get a picture with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Aretha picked her to play the part because she knew she had the voice.
Yes.
And the acting chops.
Yep.
So yeah, go see some pure beauty. Hip hoppers and those in my generation or whatever.
Yes.
This is pure beauty. Every time she opened that voice of hers, God sat up in heaven and smiled.
Yes.
God said, my goodness gracious.
And the greatest selling album of all time was the one that she did for
Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace.
Right. With James Cleveland.
Yes, yes. And so who played? Oh, I can't tell you that part. Well, here's the funny part. When she was doing it, when Jennifer was doing it, and she was singing Amazing Grace, and she broke down because she was so overwhelmed in this movie, right? And she went back to the back, and then James Cleveland went to her and said, what's the matter, daughter? She said, what if I break down while I'm doing this? She said, you are in the house of God. The Spirit is touching you. And she said, what you gonna do? Sit there and act like an Ephesian? He just cracked up. It's like, yeah, you got to make noise up in here.
Yeah, exactly.
Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
It's
greatest,
good. Really good.
greatest male gospel singer ever, James Cleveland.
Right.
And probably the greatest singer ever,
right.
Aretha Franklin.
Right.
Two of them together. I have both of those albums, and I listen to them regularly.
Yes.
Pure soul, pure beauty.
Definitely. And then Forrest Whitaker played her daddy, and he might get an Academy. And she told Jennifer, look, just go get an Oscar for that. She played her heart out. Whether she get it or not, she sure did her job.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Yeah.
And you feel like you having church in the movie, and there's probably going to be some white people in there, and they're going to look at you funny. So don't worry about that. Because you're talking back to the screen and everything.
Okay, I think that's it. There are a lot of other comments, but I think that those are the main comments, and I want to thank both of you. This has been pure pleasure, and I hope people got something out of this. I know you did. You need to go back and listen to this one a number of times. I'm going to have to, especially those charts. So, Brianna and Siri, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
Right on.
Thank you.
Hotep.
Hotep.
Hotep.